In this video, we are going to be looking at the SQL Basics series, and in this video, we're going to be discussing SQL Injection. It should be of note that this video is going to be using Microsoft SQL Server, and this is a contrived example. Generally speaking, when we see SQL Injection, many of the times it will be between the middleware layer and the database layer. Another one as well that you might see it come up is when you have API strings. So you have various elements of the API that you're querying and you're getting back information. And what the hacker will do is they'll look at those strings, let's say the AND statements, and they'll try to play with those AND statements to get more information back. So this example is contrived, but it does highlight exactly what some of the basics of where we see SQL injection and some of the techniques that we can use for getting around that. So in this screenshot here, we see that what we have going on is I'm creating a copy table and I'm dropping it at the end. We see I'm declaring this where input. This is going to be where the SQL injection occurs from the hacker. You'll notice one of the most obvious first mistakes is this navarchar max. That's a major mistake. And we see that they're passing in table as in the where clause, but they're adding an extra apostrophe here. And then we see what they're doing is they're putting a semicolon, so that would be a break. And then they're selecting top one schema name, which is going to return a schema name and the table name from systables. This is, even though the most popular example with SQL injection is dropping tables, most of your hackers are going to be after information. So this is what you really have to concern yourself with is reconnaissance. And so the dropping table examples, while that's definitely popular, that's less realistic in what you're going to see. And then again, this right here is not a smart way of going about letting a user pass an input at all. But as we see, they're doing a direct execution of this query along with whatever the input is. So when we run this query here, what we see is, of course, it returns this top one schema name and table name. And so this would allow the hacker, of course, to get access to information in our database. Now, there's numerous problems with this. For one, you never ever want a hacker to be able to pass in anything. So you want to validate the input. But let's put that aside. One of the other ones, and this is just a simple example of how to improve this, I wouldn't use this at all. But just as a case in point, if we know that region, let's say, is one character, then we don't ever want to give the hacker the ability to just pass in anything. And so even if the hacker were to, and they're passing in basically one apostrophe here, even if they were to pass in one apostrophe because they only have one character, it's not going to return anything and it's not going to execute this other, right? They don't have the space to do that, right? And that's the key. Of course, the concern here is that if there was more, they would still be able to get in. That's what I'm saying. This right here is poorly written. I wouldn't use this at all. So this is one of the reasons why when we think about SQL injection, and this is why it's in the SQL Basics here, we want to think about how are we validating the input first of all? How are we executing what a user is passing in? Since we're selecting from a table, it would just be a normal select statement with a parameter, right? We wouldn't be dynamically executing a select statement here. And you do unfortunately see things like this when it comes to, again, usually the middleware to database communication, where like they're allowing anything to be passed in as the first name and anything to be passed in as the last name, or anything to be passed in as a business name, or anything to be passed in as a state. We don't want to do that. We want to parameterize that. You pass in that, we'll validate the input, and then we'll pass it in from there. And so this is a good example of some of the things that we have to look out for just because you can dynamically execute things. And there are definitely a use case for dynamic SQL, but just because you can dynamically execute things does not mean that you want to allow that in any case.